Hello everyone, and welcome to the Biblical Bookworm. My name is Elizabeth, and today I'll be talking about the book called What Happens After Saying Yes to God by Father Casey Cole. It was written in 2018, and it offers guidance and reflections on how to discern and respond to God's call, whether it be to religious life, marriage, the priesthood, or another vocation. The author discusses the discernment process and shares personal stories and insights to help readers understand the journey of discovering and living out their vocations. Before we dive deeper into the content of this book, let me introduce you to the author of the book. Casey Cole, OFM, is an American Franciscan friar and Catholic priest who has a YouTube channel called Breaking the Habit with currently over 300,000 subscribers. Just for some context, he was received as a novice in 2012, and at the time of writing this book, so in 2018, he wasn't a priest yet. I've already reviewed one of his books called Let Go: 7 Stumbling Blocks to Christian Discipleship, which I liked a lot, and I can tell you already that just as that other book, the book I'm going to talk about today didn't disappoint. Let's start with the question, how to find out what God is calling you to. Father Casey starts off by suggesting two questions to determine one's calling. The first question is, would you genuinely enjoy doing the things related to that calling? He explains that the presence or absence of joy in our life can be a clear indication of how close we are to that true calling. The author clarifies that this doesn't mean that you'll be constantly happy in that calling, but rather that you'll find yourself rejoicing in the pursuit of that vocation. It's important to remember that God isn't calling you to a life of misery, so it's vital to ask yourself, what do I truly enjoy doing? The second question is, what does the world, particularly the church, need that you can provide? Father Casey highlights that this question goes beyond your capabilities. It's about what God can accomplish through you. Your calling might stretch far beyond your comfort zone, and saying yes should mean being open without conditions. In that context, Father Casey also stresses that it's essential to understand that a conditional yes isn't really a yes at all. We need to be open to serving God in any way He calls us, because if everyone chose the same path, there would be no one left to fulfill other essential roles. So for example, when everyone became a religious person, Christianity would die out because there would be no one to raise children. The author also reminds us that fear can often hold us back from even asking what God might have in store for us. He himself didn't have the courage to discern his vocation at first because he was so afraid of what that calling would be. So embrace these questions, seek your calling, and trust that your unique path can lead to a more fulfilling life. Talking about that, I'd like to mention my absolute favorite quote ever, which if you've watched a couple of my videos, you'll know that I mention it quite often. It's from the book Uniformity with God's Will by St. Alphonsus. Beyond the possibility of a doubt, God works to affect your welfare infinitely better than we could ever hope to accomplish or desire it ourselves. I encourage you to meditate on that sentence when discerning your vocation. Whatever God is calling you to is infinitely better than anything you could ever wish for yourself. Related to that, another thing the author touches upon is that by prayerfully reviewing the past, he realized that he's a different person than he was before, and God has clearly been the one shaping him along the way. Father Casey encourages the reader to practice something like Lectio Divina of life, where we can experience God by rereading our life's journey. I really like this idea because it fills you with courage regarding the things to come, and it improves your trust in God because you realize how He turns your entire life and every single thing you experience, be it positive or negative at first, into something good. In another chapter, the author gives an example for that, so where God turned his failure into success. The story is that he really messed something up during the liturgy on Good Friday, and he felt really embarrassed and humiliated. But after that, many people cared for him and asked him how he was doing, and one brother even said that he didn't like him before because Father Casey appeared to be too perfect to him, but after that incident, he saw him as a friend. So that's an example of how God used his failure and his weakness to bring about good. Let me read a quote from the book. When I look at where I've been and what it took to get me where I am, what emerges is a clear path that seems not to have been possible by any other course. A path with growth and understanding. A path that seems to have been guided by one stronger than I. Now let's get to some what-if questions regarding the religious life in particular, or some objections. The author devotes a portion of his book to people who ask him, what if he falls in love? The author explains that he finds that question very offensive because no one would ask that a married person or someone who's engaged. So for him, asking that question is disrespectful because people seem to value a promise to another human, so marriage, more than a promise to God, so the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. It also saddens him that people who ask this seem to think that the only reason anyone would become a friar is because they're either asexual or they can't find a romantic partner. And as soon as someone would come along their way, they would choose marriage over religious life immediately. He clarifies that this is not the case and that people who choose religious life had other options. For example, in his case, I think he was in 2 long-term relationships where he could see himself marrying that person, but ultimately he decided to devote his life to God by joining the Franciscan friars. Another objection Father Casey addresses in his book is the critique of the Franciscan friars as a whole regarding their lack of poverty, because some people say that the way Franciscan friars live isn't actually poor and that many people live under substantially worse conditions. He answers that objection by saying that many of our luxuries are built in through our society. So for example, we can't really get rid of clear drinking water, or at least that's not that easy. Or we won't turn off the AC and ask everyone whom we visit to do the same in order to experience the heat that people in less fortunate circumstances have to experience. There's a limit to how poor the Franciscan friars can live here in the There's a limit to how poor the Franciscan friars can live in the US. Father Casey writes that for him the focus on poverty was the major attraction, or one of the major attractions for him to join the Franciscans. And he was disappointed when he found out that they don't live as poor as he imagined. But as he explains, poverty is a shared decision of the friars as they live in a community, and sometimes he has to compromise on his own ideals for the sake of that community, because, for example, he can't get rid of the furniture, and he can't always skip the meal if the meal is too luxurious for his standards. In conclusion, he says that it's better to be challenged by his brothers than to do whatever he wants to do, and that's also a type of poverty because it's the poverty of not being in control. Finally, I'd like to summarize Father Casey's tips on how to improve one's prayer life. I know that that doesn't directly have to do with the topic of discernment, but I still wanted to summarize it because he also mentions it in that book, and I found it very helpful and interesting. First of all, Father Casey reminds us that sometimes prayer is just about enjoying the time spent together with God without doing anything productive. Just as with good friends, you sometimes just enjoy each other's company and don't feel the need to necessarily talk about something or to do something. And another thing he mentions is that prayer is an act of fidelity, and while you can't control how well you'll be able to concentrate during prayer, what you can control is if you show up. So it's better to check off that box than not to pray at all. Now let's get to my opinion on the book. I'd say this book is a well-deserved 9 out of 10, and I became an absolute fan of Father Casey's book, and so I'm looking forward to his future publications. Maybe there will be some. That's been it for today. I hope you liked the video. See you next week. God bless, and bye!